She called me worthless into a room full of cameras. I answered with paperwork. Dallas ballrooms all look the same when the budget's generous. Chandeliers tuned to ambitious. Carpet that hides the price in the pile. A logo looping on screens like it's hypnotizing investors. I stood near the back with a glass of seltzer and the quiet kind of patience that makes salespeople uneasy. Maya lived for nights like this, the applause, the microphones, the little nods from executives who talk like airports. I learned to stand still and count exits. It's a habit you pick up when your job deals in patterns. Noise is a pattern too. I didn't hear the sentence all at once. It threaded through laughter and clinking glass, emerged whole when the music dipped. He's completely worthless to me. Not shouted, not even cruel in tone, just confident like a status update. It traveled from the circle near the stage, past the video crew, and landed where I was standing among coat racks and carefully neglected spouses. I didn't turn. I watched the reflection in a brass wall sconce. Maya's hand resting on Richard Thompson's sleeve, her smile pitched to private, her head tilted at a degree that says both devotion and strategy. It's a small angle, the kind you only notice after you've spent years plotting scatter points and catching outliers. I set my glass down. It made a soft sound on the linen-covered table. Small, final. Then I left. No dramatic pivot, no scene. Just a man walking a straight line to cool air and a service corridor that smelled like detergent and electricity. If you do anger publicly, you feed the wrong audience. My father used to say that in his shop when a customer raised their voice about a deadline. Don't fight with a man holding a megaphone. Talk to the man who owns the power switch. In the hallway, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Ryan Ellis, compliance. We met once at a holiday party when we both pretended to enjoy gingerbread. He's the kind of professional who files his calendar by instinct and sleeps with a notepad. Ellis, he answered on the second ring. It's Ethan, I said. I'm at the Omni. Your regional VP is wearing a wine smile and making short work of company policy. You'll want eyes on it. There was a half-second of silence in which I could hear him sit up straighter. Is this about Park? He asked, neutral. This is about Thompson, I replied. Park is the accessory. 2 drinks paid under a client code. Off-site meeting, color-coded, as vendor outreach on a Friday night in a ballroom. We both know the policy pages. I heard a pen cap click. I'm 10 minutes out, he said. Don't go back inside. I won't, I said, and killed the call. Justice is administrative before it's dramatic. People forget that. They think justice is a speech and a crowd and a perfect line delivered in the exact beat of a soundtrack. Most days, justice is a form with the right fields filled, a timestamp that proves the order of things, and a door that opens because your badge still works. I stood by the loading dock and watched a caterer smoke a cigarette like it owed him rent. 10 minutes stretched into 9. I used the time to breathe instead of rehearse anger. Ryan arrived with a colleague from HR whose eyes did quick math on faces and exits. He wasn't here to be moved. He was here to verify. We walked through the service hall together, the way people do before a procedure. He didn't ask for evidence because he already had enough to initiate review. Travel receipts, calendar entries, the kind of metadata corporate life produces without knowing it's a diary. The ballroom doors thumped with bass. Inside, desserts were about to be plated. Timing in narratives is not art. It's logistics. We waited near a side entrance until dessert forks made their bright little chorus. Then Ryan stepped out with that polite authority that makes confident people blink. The music fell by a polite notch. Cameras turned like sunflowers. He didn't look at Maya first. He addressed the VP. Mr. Thompson, he said, we'll need you and Ms. Park to come with us. Richard smiled the way men do when they think it's theater. You can send an email, son, he said, not unkindly, but with the lacquer of time in senior roles. I did, Ryan replied. This is the follow-up. Phones rose, 100 little rectangles. Learning toward a moment, I watched from the edge, no more part of the scene than the potted palms. Maya's hand tightened around her clutch. I knew that grip. It meant calculation, not fear. They walked out together. The room buzzed in their wake like a radio between stations. I didn't follow them into the conference room that hotels keep near their ballrooms for weddings that need a plan B. I didn't need to. Justice, remember, is administrative first. I stood in the corridor and listened to air vents and people trying to pretend they weren't trying to listen. The next hour played out the way the handbook imagines, but rarely gets to script. Questions, clarifications, a request for devices, access suspended pending review. The company car keys, well, the fob, went into a hotel glass that used to hope for flowers. I got a message from Ryan. Go home, sleep. We'll be in touch before noon. I walked out into Dallas night that had cooled enough to make breath visible if you looked for it. I didn't. I walked to the garage and drove home with the radio off, and my hands steady at 10 and 2 like a diagram. At the house, the dark welcomed me the way honest silence does. No theater, no sting, just room. I turned on the kitchen light and lined up 3 folders. Bank, mortgage, notes. It wasn't reflex. It was discipline. There are only a few levers you should pull, while adrenaline is still interviewing you for a job it shouldn't have. First, separate what's joint from what's yours, in the correct order and within the law. Second, document without narrative. Dates, times, amounts, no adjectives. Third, sleep or do the closest legal approximation. Before bed, I opened the fire safe and took out the go bag that isn't for emergencies, so much as it is for mornings like this, when you know your day will include courthouse air and signatures that taste like chalk. Inside, copies of the prenup, copies of investments with clear ownership, an index card with my lawyer's direct line, and a small USB thumb drive in a clear envelope labeled in my handwriting. Play me. It didn't contain a sting. I'm not a movie. It contained 2 things. A recording from last month's agency dinner where Maya, after 2 generous pours, spoke about leveraging proximity to power like she was telling a harmless joke, and a screenshot sequence of an internal expense report approved with the speed only second-in-commands enjoy. In a courtroom, you might need more. In a conference room, context and timing supply the rest. I slept 5 hours. That is enough to keep a voice flat and a hand legible. At 8:10 a.m., yet I called my lawyer, a woman who speaks clauses like a first language. She'd read the prenup when we signed it and had raised an eyebrow in a way that said she respected the ambition of the other party. We'll move on the dissolution today, she said, after I explained the last 12 hours in nouns and timestamps. No accusations we can't sustain. We litigate on paper, not in the street. I agreed. We scheduled, signed, filed. By 11:15 a.m., the clerk had our petition, and a clock had begun to tick in a building that has heard every kind of ending and never once volunteered editorial. Ryan texted a single word at noon. Progress. It carried more weight than updates with adjectives. The company had initiated a formal review, which in corporate dialect means a small room with big consequences. Access was suspended, laptops collected, phones logged. It sounds petty when you say it fast. It's not. It's the pivot point where authority moves from personality to policy. At 12:40 p.m., Maya walked into the kitchen with the light already on and a look like weather gathering. She had her keys, and the attitude being late sometimes buys you until it doesn't. They took my laptop, she announced, as if this house caught newscasts. It's a misunderstanding and I need... She stopped. The table wasn't as she left it. The table was organized. 3 folders. A stack of mail with flagged lines. The clear envelope with the USB. The top sheet, concise, time-stamped, listed the steps already in motion. What is this? She asked, quieter. Paperwork, I said, the way you would name a tool on a workbench. You called me something last night. I answered in the language available. She laughed once, short. You're being dramatic. You're mistaking silence for theater, I said. I slid the clear envelope toward her. Play that somewhere private. It may save you from improvising. "I'm not watching your little spy movie," she said, but the way her fingers collected the envelope said otherwise. She pocketed it like contraband and looked around the kitchen with new eyes, the way you study a room after someone says, "fire drill." "Grace is going to have a stroke if you go through with this," she added, meaning her mother, meaning leverage. Grace didn't have a stroke. Grace called me at 1:08 p.m., voice steady in a way that reminded me how she negotiates in a city that treats square footage like sacrament. "Ethan," she said, skipping pleasantries, "I received notice of transfers from accounts I believed were joint." "They were not," I said. "We were careful with categories from the beginning. The notice you're seeing is a courtesy copied by a system that assumes families are happier when they're informed." A controlled inhale hummed on the line. "And Maya?" "Is in review with her employer," I said. "I'm not her spokesperson. She told me you were being vindictive." "I'm being accurate," I replied. "Vindictive requires imagination." I used forms. Grace exhaled a sound that wasn't defeat so much as recalculation. "I always told her quiet men aren't weak," she said, voice drifting for a moment into a memory neither of us shared. Then she returned to present tense, like a professional finding her place in a paragraph. "I don't want this to get uglier than necessary." "Then simplicity will be your friend," I said. "No joint accusations, no public statements. We'll let the filings and company process do the work." "What about the press?" she asked, which told me she had already imagined a headline that could bruise property values. "Press loves noise," I said. "We're not making any. Your daughter's colleagues have phones, and they've been practicing this choreography for years." That was the first time the day felt heavy, not triumphant, not justified, just heavy. You can enforce a boundary without enjoying the fence. I hung up, and the house returned to the sound of a refrigerator that has been doing its job longer than most marriages last in certain zip codes. On the table, under notes, I wrote a single line: "Stop explaining." It's the most violent thing you can do to a habit. By late afternoon, the first clip surfaced. It wasn't dramatic. No slaps, no shouting, no shattered decor. Just a camera aimed at that corner of the ballroom where ambition goes to be flattered. Richard's hand on Maya's arm. The sound unkind, but crisp. The sentence that found me last night, now captioned by someone whose handle suggested they admire accountability when it happens to other people. Comments rolled like weather. Some cruel, some earnest, most sure. Ryan called at 4:10 p.m. "Tribunal at 9 tomorrow," he said. "Not a court, but we will ask the kinds of questions that make people wish they'd done math before they did drinks." "I won't attend," I said. "Good," he replied. "This is between policy and choice." I made coffee at 5 because routine is a form of health. Maya didn't come home for dinner. I didn't interpret it. That night I slept without dreams, which is not the same thing as peace, but passes for it in a week that asks you to file paperwork on the structure you thought your life lived in. Morning arrived like a foreman, early, plain, on schedule. I ironed a shirt I didn't need to wear. I looked out at a piece of suburban Texas that hosts the same dramas every state does with different signage. At 8:50 a.m., my phone vibrated with a text from Ryan. "We're starting." I set the phone face down and went to the sink. The house was quiet in a way that felt honest, not empty. 10 minutes passed, 12, 15. Time does the trick it always does when you're not in the room. It grows in imagination. I reminded myself, investigations don't reward fantasy. They reward receipts. At 9:23 a.m., the phone buzzed again. Not a text, a photo. The kind corporate security sometimes sends when they need confirmation of an asset. It was Maya's assigned laptop on a table, serial number visible, power off. Then another, a printed list of expense line items, 2 dinner charges on the same night, with a client code that was neither present nor hungry. Then a third, not from Ryan. A message from a number I didn't recognize, but felt corporate by punctuation. Termination in process, it read. Final meeting, 11:30. I poured a second coffee and left it to cool. Heat is a dramatic instinct. Cool carries signatures. At 11:47, I parked across the street from the office building because dignity is not a spectator sport, but sometimes observation is hygiene. The Texas sun had decided to be kind to everyone but the asphalt. I watched the doors. At 12:16 they opened, and the choreography I'd seen 100 times as a citizen of work played out. Cardboard box, a jacket folded on top, a water bottle with someone's logo, a pair of shoes in their own bag for later. Maya's face didn't look at anything. She walked the neutral walk people practice when they've learned not to advertise a collapse. I didn't move. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't imagine a speech that would make the kind of sense speeches never make in parking lots. I waited until she turned the corner. Then I put the car in gear and let the afternoon resume, being a place people go through on their way to evenings. B5. Voice over story. Part 2-2. Chihuan, 300 words. The afternoon folded into evening without proposing meaning. That's the mercy of days like this. They refuse poetry until you stop asking. I drove home a long way, the route that passes a row of live oaks older than the arguments people bring to court. My phone sat face down in the passenger seat, vibrating now and then like a nervous animal. I let it. I parked, cut the engine, and listened to the tick of cooling metal. It's a small sound, honest like a tool being set down in the right place. Inside, I made dinner the way you do when you need your hands, to remind you what enough looks like. Pan, heat, salt, egg, toast. No wine. I ate standing up because chairs invite conclusions. I washed the plate and left it to dry. I wrote down what I had done that day in a notebook that has nothing to do with work. Dates, names, hours, no adjectives. My lawyer called to confirm filings had posted and that we would say nothing in public beyond what courts already say in public on their own. You chose the boring path, she said, and I could hear the approval a professional saves for clients who don't make messes they can't mop. Boring wins. At 8:32 p.m., the first real storm arrived. Not from Maya, not from HR, but from the internet's reflex to organize other people's days into content. The Ballroom clip had grown a spine of captions, a ribcage of reaction videos, and a set of opinions that inhaled certainty and exhaled performance. Strangers called me a hero, a coward, a saint of paperwork, a cautionary tale, a bot. Strangers called Maya every word the alphabet can twist into a cudgel. I put the phone down. You can't invite a crowd to your porch and then complain about footprints. I had not invited them, but they'd found the address anyway. Grace texted, brief as a ledger. Understood. We'll coordinate with counsel. That was all. Not an apology, not a defense, just the sentence a person writes when her map has been redrawn. I answered with a similar economy. Thank you. Then I silenced everything and went to bed with the lights off and the door open the way I did as a kid in a house where air moved like a language. Sleep didn't come as a story. It came as a shut door. Morning opened it the way mornings do in zip codes that pay for trash pickup and expect the truck on time. I made coffee and stepped onto the back patio where the yard is the size of a question you can afford to answer. The neighbor's sprinkler clicked in a circle that looked like diligence. I breathed. I didn't rehearse anything because the day didn't want a script. It wanted presence. At 9:07 a.m., my lawyer's assistant called to confirm that service had been accepted and that the calendar now contained a chain of small, specific obligations that, if honored, would prevent the larger catastrophes people tell barstools later. No statements to press, she repeated, not because she doubted me, but because repetition is the discipline that saves you when impulse asks for a turn at the mic. We do paper, not parades. At 10:24 a.m., Ryan sent a short note. Termination completed. Company pursuing recovery of funds. There were attachments I didn't open. I didn't need to see another person's signature turning a corner. I already knew the shape of the letter. I'd been drawing it in my head since the first time I watched someone mistake charisma for compliance. I replied with 2 words. Thank you. I drove to the bank at noon because some errands feel like witnesses. The teller smiled the way professionals do when they sense you're here to do adult math rather than argue about fees. I asked for account confirmations. What was mine? What was ours pending dissolution? What would freeze upon request? And what had already been rekeyed by last night's decisions? She printed papers. I signed where the stickers told me to sign. I placed the carbon copies in a folder labeled the way a man labels things when he intends to find them later without raising his voice at a drawer. Outside, Dallas did the thing it does best. Act like weather is a personality trait. Heat leaned on every surface, but shade stood its ground. I picked shade. On the short walk back to the car, I thought about the word worthless and how easily it left a mouth that had once said forever. Tianfan language is a tool. Some people use it like a hammer, some like a key, some like a match. I decided that mine would remain a level, the kind a carpenter sets on a beam to check if the world has shifted or if it's just your grip. When I got home, there was a box on the porch. Not a metaphor. Brown cardboard, printed return address from a corporate mailroom. No knock, no signature. Inside, a few framed photos, a pair of sunglasses I had bought at an airport when we thought our lives belonged to connecting flights, and a glass award that read like a promise made to a different couple. I carried the box to the guest room and set it on the bed. That room has good light in late afternoon. It can hold what you don't know what to do with until the sun reminds you that you don't owe every object a ceremony. Maya texted at 3:11 p.m. It was not an apology, not a confession, not a plea. It was a complaint shaped like a question. Do you feel good about this? I held the phone for a moment and thought about the difference between feeling good and doing right. Then I wrote, I feel done arguing with air. I put the phone down before it replied. Sometimes restraint is not kindness, it's engineering. Grace called again at 4:02 p.m., this time with the tone of a general who has counted not just soldiers, but supplies. We'll cooperate on inventory and valuation, she said. I've advised Maya to refrain from online commentary. She is regrouping. I wish her clarity, I said, and meant it. Clarity is cheaper than pride, long term. Ethan, she added, softer, in my line of work, we say the house remembers who paid for it. I suppose marriages do too. Maybe, I answered. Or maybe paper remembers because people refuse to. We ended the call not as enemies, but as professionals, whose Venn diagram briefly overlaps on the county clerk's desk. That's fine. Civility isn't friendship. It's infrastructure. In the next few days, the internet performed its cycle. Novelty, repetition, counter-narrative. Fatigue. A think piece surfaced about quiet justice that used our clip as a case study in boundaries. Enforced without spectacle. Another argued I should have confronted publicly because catharsis likes company. A third insisted nothing matters without forgiveness. The takes arranged themselves like a showroom, polished for sale, already dusted by afternoon. I didn't buy anything. I divided the house into halves. Not his and hers, not trophies and ghosts. Functional halves. Keep, release. In the keep pile went the tools that know my hands and the books that taught me something after page 50. In the release pile went duplicates, aspirational gadgets, the cocktail set we used 4 times in 2 years because we preferred coffee that tells the truth at 6 a.m. I labeled cables. I threw away boxes for devices we no longer own, because carrying history for warranties you can't claim is a hobby I don't recommend. When the hearing date arrived, the one about division rather than guilt, I wore a plain suit and a face that didn't audition for sympathy. My lawyer spoke. Papers spoke louder. Maya's attorney did his job. That's not a sin. We resolved what adults resolve when they decide to pay the bill for choices without adding tips of bitterness. The judge signed what judges sign when the work has been done in advance, and the room offers no theatrics worth remembering. Afterward, in the hall that turns echo into etiquette, Maya approached. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She looked like a person who had just learned the difference between loud and strong. "I thought you didn't have it in you," she said. "I didn't," I answered. "That's why I wrote it down." She nodded once, maybe at me, maybe at a version of herself stepping into a story that doesn't bother with applause. "Don't make a speech about me online," she said. "Please." "I won't," I said. "I didn't before." We walked away from each other at the pace adults use when they mean to keep dignity in their pockets and take it out later, folded, to see if it survived the day. Outside, the weather had decided on shade again. I chose a bench and sat with a paper cup of water that tasted like courthouse air. I called my father's number out of habit and listened to the voicemail that still carries the voice of a man who could square a frame with his eye. "If it wobbles," he liked to say, "don't curse the wood, check your cut." I told the air I had checked my cut. It felt true enough to put away. I moved apartments a month later, not far, just far enough to reset the stories the walls tell at night. The new place is smaller, the kind of small that refuses clutter and rewards intention. I hung fewer pictures. I bought a plant with an instruction card that promised it could survive neglect, and then watered it anyway. I walked different sidewalks. I found a coffee shop that plays music like a suggestion rather than a dare. The barista learned my name without making it a performance. A woman at the next table once asked about the thing I was reading, and we both agreed to like it quietly. Sometimes the clip resurfaces when someone needs a lesson or a villain or a hero. Sometimes a friend sends it without comment, the way people share weather. I don't reply. The story belongs to the paperwork now. When I think about the ballroom, I don't see the phones. I see a linen-covered table and the exact sound a glass makes when you set it down because it's time to leave. I see a corridor that smelled like detergent and electricity. I hear myself say Ellis into a phone that did what it was made to do. People ask in the ways people do when they are afraid for their own futures if I regret not giving a speech. Speeches feel good. Forms hold. If there's a lesson here, it's not a thesis. It's a practice. When someone calls you worthless into a room full of cameras, decide which language you want to be fluent in. I chose paperwork. On Sundays, I drive past the live oaks and park, under the one that looks like a hand raised with patience. I sit, drink coffee that doesn't try to fix anything, and write a short list for the week. Call Mom, oil the hinge on the pantry door, schedule the dentist, send Grace the final inventory for signatures, replace the porch bulb. Plans don't make life perfect. They make it readable. Quiet isn't weakness. It's room. Justice isn't loud. It's level. When I stand to go, I check the bench for what I brought, so I don't leave a piece of my day for someone else to throw away. Then I walk to the car with the steadiness you get when you finally stopped explaining to air and started speaking to the things that answer back. Locks, forms, calendars, doors that open because you kept the key. I drive home without the radio. The road hums its ordinary song. The house meets me with the light I left on like a practical promise. The porch bulb, newly replaced, clicks on at dusk without being asked. It's a small thing, that kind of obedience. It's also the point.